Back with you. We continue our reflection with the Build One South Africa leader, Mmusi Maimane, and international relations expert, Dr. Westen Shilaho. Now that Trump has made a comeback to the White House, what next? What will happen? Mmusi, let's talk about what your views are. I mean, does this force South Africa, and when I'm saying South Africa in this particular instance, the ANC, to reconsider its preferences when it comes to security, economic and trade partners?
Well, I think more than anything, sometimes it's important to take note that in foreign policy, you've almost got to be driven, as President Mandela so aptly put it, on two poles, the first being human rights and the second being that of trade. And I think South Africa can ill afford to forego trade relations with the US. And so in many ways, you can appreciate that the size of their market relative to the size of our market, it's an important trading partner to maintain. But I also think that it's also beneficial for the US. It's not just one-way traffic. It also pertains to the fact that Africa in general is a 1.2 billion people population by 2040 projected. And therefore, that market is quite a sizable one. And it's important for the US as you look at even companies like Amazon and you look at where it goes in the continent. So that's an important dynamic. The second is obviously on defense and security corporations. As there's geopolitical instability, certainly in the Middle East and certainly in Russia, Ukraine, it also means that the trade routes that travel through South Africa are going to be important for US, not only naval bases, but also from the way their goods travel. So I don't think we should get into a space of saying the US foreign policy, it can only be limited exclusively to an individual. I think when it comes to the choices we have made in Israel and Gaza, I think that's going to be an important question for us to be able to navigate through with the US. I don't think it's always as hard and fast as that. It's that South Africa cannot be seen to be an enemy of the United States, regardless of its position elsewhere. Certainly considering that as the election results are projecting, that you may find a Republican House and a Republican House of Representatives and a Senate House. So that is an important question to settle. But I do think on foreign policy, South Africa will do well to reassure and re-strengthen its trade relations, as it will go with the UK. And as many others post-Brexit were asking the same questions. So I do think this is a massive opportunity for us. I think taking the tone with what President Ramaphosa has put forward, going into next year's G20 summit, it'd be important that it is in all probability, President Trump will have to come to South Africa. And so it's going to be important what our reception is. And we can't treat the US in a space of 4 years and simply say at the end of 4 years, we'll either reset or resume. We must take a long-term view and recognize that as President Trump's term starts, it will come to an end, and therefore a new president will come through. Our trade relations will remain, as will the ANC's. It will come to an end and a new term will come forward. But the countries will continue to exist. And that's why it's going to be important that our foreign policy isn't short-term in its approach or personality-driven, but it looks at the long-term implications of not only South Africa, but the continent at large.
Dr. Westen, of course, this means Washington is going to be looking at South Africa and Africa at large through the geopolitical prism. Now, if you like, Trump sees China as the enemy and sees Russia as a friend. We, as South Africa, are in BRICS. We see both of them as friends. What does that mean for us?
Well, I wish to remind you about Henry Kissinger's quote, one of America's most consequential secretaries of state. He's on record as saying that America does not have permanent friends or enemies. It only has got permanent interests. So in that sense, I don't even think that Trump thinks that China is America's enemy. Or he doesn't think that Africa is inconsequential as far as America's strategic interests are concerned. Such that if you look at the outcome of the elections, there is this propensity to misread Donald Trump as a political actor. There's a disjuncture between his rhetoric and the practice of his politics. So because he's a deal maker, if he realizes that there are many things in Africa that he can extract from Africa to advance his Make America Great Again ideology back home, he won't hesitate to do that. And you have to look at the African leaders who have been quick to congratulate him. South Africa, Kenya, Ethiopia, Egypt. These are strategic, and Nigeria. These are strategic African countries, anchor states. And I can put it to you that Donald Trump will not ignore these countries, in as much as he may not look at Africa the way his predecessors did in terms of symmetry, inviting all the African leadership into DC. But he'll continue engaging Africa. And at the same time, he's aware that if he doesn't, in the sense that Africa has increasingly become strategic to very many global actors, but America has not placed itself strategically to engage Africa, which created room for China and other emerging powers to make inroads on the continent. I think Donald Trump, he may have described Africa scatologically, he's a deal maker. He's going to engage Africa if, by way of reaching out to individual African leaders who are at the helm of these anchor states in Southern Africa, East Africa, West Africa, North Africa. He'll do it. So I think what's imperative is that for the African leadership under regional economic communities or through the umbrella African Union to get their act together and see what is it that they can extract for the betterment of their people from the West and from the East, as opposed to this tendency to look at geopolitics globally through what I would think is this outdated, West versus East dichotomy that existed during the Cold War. I think that kind of prism has been overtaken by events. It's about what are your interests nationally, as South Africa, as Nigeria, Kenya, and collectively as Africa. And where can the American government help us advance those interests? Because after all, we're interdependent as members of the global community.